Hi, guys. Hello. I'm Zack Brown. I'm super excited to be here today to talk about a subject that I'm really passionate about, which is animations and interactions on the web. A bit of background about myself. I'm a developer and partner at a company called Thomas Street. We are based in Seattle and San Francisco, and we are a software design and development company that really specializes in building rich internet applications. So with this focus on interactivity on the web, that's what really drew us to Famous about 8 months ago. Famous is a platform that offers high-performance rendering on the web. And the promise is that it does bring really rich, interactivity. Again, so this is our wheelhouse. This is something we wanted to check out, and I'll cover that more in a second. So first, let's look at the mobile/web space. Users have expectations. They are spoiled. And it's really difficult, especially with existing and traditional web standards, to deliver this sort of interactivity, let alone performance, to users for mobile applications. So this is a problem, right? When we're trying to deliver rich experiences, this is what we have to go against on the web. And I see a few fundamental barriers that web needs to overcome in order to really compete on this space with native. One of these is performance. And this is getting better. There's hardware acceleration with things like CSS transitions, but it can still be tricky. Ease of wrapping has been a challenge in the past, but as Cordova's been maturing and as there are things like Crosswalk and Ionic has an extremely easy-to-use CLI, this is getting better. But there is one key piece that is just fundamentally difficult, which is that rich interactivity. CSS falls short. In my opinion, and I'll cover that in a second. And JavaScript traditionally sacrifices performance if you're going to try to do DOM animations. We'll cover that as well. So CSS. We simply can't do that sort of tap and drag and things unfold as you drag and then they fold back as you close it. This is sort of what makes a really rich interaction is that delight when you just want to play with it, right? It's like you open a native iOS app, and it's like, oh, this is really fun. Like, I'll spend 10 seconds dragging this back and forth. That's something that's extremely difficult to achieve with CSS. So when things get complex, it's either extremely hard to execute these things or impossible. When we reach for things like generators, CSS generators to execute moderately complex animations, that's a really stinky smell to me. We shouldn't need to reach for generators, and this has implications for maintenance as well as authoring in the first place. So what this is really is a declarative ceiling. At a certain point, a purely declarative language like CSS is maybe just not suitable for these sorts of interactions. So what's hard? Complex and orchestrated timelines, knowing when your transitions are done. Halting transitions can be pretty tricky, especially if you want to do like halfway. And what's essentially impossible is conditions, control flow, non-determinism, randomness, any sort of computation, responding to non-trivial user input. All of these things are things that we get with JavaScript. What we're really begging for in this case is some sort of Turing completeness that CSS doesn't offer. So what about JavaScript then? Why don't we just use JavaScript for all of our animations? The problem with that is performance, especially when interacting with the DOM. If you try to just move things, translate them in the DOM, things get real nasty real fast, especially on mobile. So, connectivity issue here. Womp. Okay. So I'm going to make a bold claim here that as I drag this over, rich interactions, which users expect from today's mobile apps, are fundamentally better suited to imperative than to declarative animations. Maybe I'm alone on this, but I'm not sure how I would execute this particular example in pure CSS. The ability to really interact with the user input, to be able to interact with like the timeline of the user touch. So this is a simple little famous Angular example that I threw together to sort of illustrate this point. This was inspired by the Android like pull-down bar, things where you want to like compute velocity, or interact non-deterministically or with physics. I personally believe that this is a case where JavaScript is the answer. Woo! So then, if only there was some way to make these JavaScript animations performant, with 60 frames per second as the pinnacle goal, enter Famous. So their core value proposition is that, yes, you can do these animations imperatively in JavaScript, cross-platform, high performance. And then if we look back to those 3 barriers to the world domination of web, we can knock out rich interactivity. So I'm not going to go too deep into the technical stuff for Famous. I actually gave a talk at Mountain View a couple months back, and that's on YouTube if you want to Google Famous Angular. I go quite a bit deeper. I'm more interested in like what we can do and sort of the horizon for this talk today. But in short, Famous starts from the ground up. It uses its own render tree. Instead of using the DOM, it uses its own virtual render tree. And it composites the values of this render tree on every tick into matrix 3D CSS transform values. So this achieves behavior in the browser that heretofore we've only been able to see in the worlds of 3D graphics and GL and like DirectX. So fundamentally different approach. Of course, this has some costs, right? It can be hard, especially initially, to integrate with the existing standards that we know and love and use on our apps today. But what about the benefits? Like, is it worth it? We get performance, imperative interactions. We get unlimited expressiveness. And coming soon, and I'll cover this in a second too, the next version of Famous is going to have deep WebGL integration. So imagine you create a div. So if you've ever tried to integrate WebGL with normal DOM, the first problem you're going to run into is they exist in different coordinate spaces. You're going to have to do some real tricky math to create like a cube primitive and then translate it along the same path as a div. So the next version of Famous is going to give you one API where it is just as easy to create a sphere and add some smoke or textures to it as it is to create like a form element. So I think this is really exciting stuff. How on earth can we use all of this cool sort of start from the ground up stuff alongside these standards that we already use? Let's drum roll. Famous Angular. So let's take a detour here. Now, I'm not going to trust my connection. No. Apparently can't even trust localhost. You can do it. There we go. Oh, web fonts. All right, one more shot. Oh, it's web font CDN issue. Womp womp. If I, am I ending? Oh no, I have a theme that makes this look confusing, like incognito. Yeah. Okay, let's give this like, oh, well, right when I press enter. Let's give this like 10 seconds. 9, 8. Responsive animations. That's right. Better than an install step still, I'd like to think. Okay, I mean, I guess it's up. That would be nice, but we'll just go without web fonts. I'm not sure how broken this is going to be. But here we have the new project page for Famous Angular. This is live at famous/angular, or famous/integration/angular. We just rolled this out last night. We've been developing it for just over a month now. And we wanted this to be a real dog food experience for Famous Angular itself. So this app is built in Famous Angular. You can see as I start to scroll, everything sort of comes alive. It's responding to my touch. This is built on top of UI router. So I'm going to do a state transition. And watch what happens when we have this there's an animate enter event that's about to fire. So I change states, and everything just sort of cascades in, comes alive. That was triggered entirely by a UI view change. Just loaded another template, and bam, all this stuff comes alive. So again, we can interact with it. You can see the blue dots at the top moving as I'm scrolling. So let's take this chance to discuss Famous Angular real quick. This is what the code looks like when you write. So this is HTML. These are directives built in Angular. It's essentially an HTML DSL that allows you to create your famous render tree in HTML. You also get to do stuff like ng-repeat, because this is Angular. This all sits inside of an Angular app. So you get to really visualize that famous render tree, which in vanilla Famous can be difficult. It's purely imperative. Yeah, web fonts. You can have really fine-grained timeline control of your animations, again, because it is imperative, it's JavaScript, and we kind of get to do whatever we'd like. Bonjour, je m'appelle Zack. Let's see. You can use Angular directives like ng-repeat. This is another instance of ng-animate hooks. So as I'm dragging this guy, these guys are coming in. And just upon entering, we can create this imperative sort of swing effect. And then, of course, we get all the benefits of Angular. Well, with Famous Angular, we get this sort of organization. So Famous at its core is a rendering engine. It doesn't have all the trappings of an MVC like Angular does. And so bringing them both together is a really nice way to build big, famous apps. And then, of course, we can use Famous and Angular and whatever else we want all in the same applications. You can sort of sprinkle it in wherever you want. Don't use it wherever you don't. So it's a really robust way to sort of add this behavior where you want it. Detour complete. Web font still loaded. So that's the state of Famous Angular today. Now, as long as I'm up here, I figured I would discuss a new feature that we are rolling out with Famous Angular. So if you've written any Famous Angular in the past, there's a lot of inlining that goes on in the HTML. We have, these are Angular directives, right? These FA modifiers, these FA surfaces. And so we bind values to these through Angular data binding. And there's a lot of JavaScript to template interface, because we have all these properties we want to change and mutate and animate. Problem is that gets really verbose really quickly, maybe even unkempt. And it feels analogous to me to inlining a bunch of CSS attributes. So the problem, though, is these are Angular bindings. These are JavaScript expressions. This is not CSS. So we can't just pull this out into a style sheet, right? Right? What about responsiveness? So when we're handling both positioning and actual animation behavior separately across responsive breakpoints, oh man, I should start loading this now. Oh, it's loaded. Accidental foresight. So when we're handling positions and animation behaviors differently across these responsive breakpoints, things can get even messier. Because if we look back at the template code, maybe I'll call a function, but then I want to handle it differently if the window is this width versus this width. I want to animate it to the left instead of to the right, or from the top instead of from the bottom. So we get to use that control flow, we get that expressiveness, but things can get messy. This is something that declarative media queries in CSS handle extremely well. It's nice and clean and organized. Here is the query to which you want to select your DOM elements, and then here's sort of the payload you want to apply to it. If only we could put JavaScript in our CSS, but there are no style sheets for JavaScript, right? But what if, crazy idea here, what if we could plop a JavaScript function into our CSS? What if we have, and this is taken from Bootstrap and then messed with quite a bit, what if we take this selector, and then we have our property left, and then we could just do a JavaScript function. and we could use our ifs, and we could use our event.touches, and we could use our math.signs and physics. And could this, as ugly as it is, be an ideal balance of imperative and declarative? Probably not, because that's just really gross. Even my text editor is like, Zach, I'm not even going to try to highlight this. A little too crazy. But why don't we do it in JavaScript? So we've created this library, working name Sheets. It's fairly simple. It's good at what it does. It's like 300 lines of code. And it's a way for you to bind functions to DOM elements via selectors. So you can almost think of it like a lightweight Angular directive. And it's really focused toward animations and presentation. But you can define custom fields. For example, the transform field would really be analogous to an Angular directive. You can apply this directive to your modifier, in the case of famous Angular, via selector. And then you just write a function. It's a pretty functional reactive if you handle it right, that just delivers its payload to that element. So it's as if you're attaching a directive to an Angular element, or to an element, but with a separation of concerns. And it's a lot like CSS. Well, yeah, in that it separates the concerns. The bonus here is that we get media queries. So things like XS, SM, MD, these are borrowed from Bootstrap again. But these themselves are functions that you can declare. So it's like custom layouts. And if you look at the definition for XS in this case, or say SM, it's just literally checking window.inner width or whatever is less than 720 or whatever it is. So as the website responds and changes and grows, these functions get bound based on the branching behavior of the media queries. So let's visit that famous Angular site again, which was, again, a good chance to dog food this new little library. This is the exact same code base written in famous Angular with Sheets handling the presentation and animations. So we get the same sort of interaction, this scroll, ish. I think it's trying to load something. Oh, this is the live one. I guess I didn't have so much foresight. It was trying to load the UI view template from the production site, which didn't work so well. So now we're back to the web font adventure. If anyone is doing any bandwidth-intensive stuff, it would be great if you could unplug for a second. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, come on, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I guess if anyone wants to pull out their phone and try it out, it is live. You can go to famous/Angular. That would be a great way to check it out, but I don't want to waste any more of your time with that. So Sheets has turned out to be a great solution for responsiveness and for separation of concerns in famous Angular. Simple, powerful, expressive, just a way to bind a function to a DOM element. So again, similar to the current state of Angular directives in some ways. But it is completely separate from famous Angular, completely separate from famous. And I just open sourced it this morning for kicks. So yay! So if anyone has any ideas for sort of how to apply this to other applications, currently the only hard dependency is Angular because it's just really nice user provider and all that stuff for configuration. Even that is not a hard dependency. So github.com/ZackBrown/Sheets. If anyone's interested in checking it out, I figure there's probably no better room in the world right now to ask for open source contributors. So if anyone's interested, I would love to team up. So how about the future of famous Angular? We will be integrating with Angular 2 in @script as a first-class view-layer module. So, woo! And so our goal is to come out of the gate with Angular 2 along with famous Angular. with Angular 2's modular model, you can swap out these view layers, use them however you'd like, and we're really excited for that. Famous Mix Mode, as I started to mention earlier, is coming soon. And this is a gigantic upgrade to Famous. If you've checked out Famous before, one of the challenges that Famous has had is the API. It really takes some mind warping to get into it. It's complex. It's very powerful, but it's also very complex. And so this new version of Famous is cleaning up that API a lot. It's a lot more accessible, easier to use. And of course, there's that WebGL integration, which I think, especially with this Angular integration, could really move the needle on both libraries. Like imagine doing really cool GL stuff with Angular 2. And of course, we will continue exploring ways to further this frontier of web interactivity. Famous's mantra is, we want the web to win. And I agree with that. So, handful of resources here. This slide deck itself, hopefully with a better internet connection, can be accessed at thomasstreet.com/ngeurope. You can visit famous/Angular for the Famous Angular project page, GitHub repo, Sheets, as I mentioned. You can visit thomasstreet.com, or you can email me or follow me on Twitter. Thank you, guys.